Elena from Virginia, what's on your mind?
A political poll just came out. I believe this is from Big Village on the 2024 National Democratic primary. Can you guess who wasn't included in the polling?
Who? Bernie Sanders?
Marianne Williamson. The only Democratic candidate that is officially running.
Mm-hmm.
So here's my question. If independent media, which you are independent media, right?
Yes.
So if independent media believes itself to have this obligation, I think it's a righteous one, to tell the stories that the mainstream is deliberately and systematically suppressing. I just have to ask, like, when are you planning to bring Marianne Williamson to the show?
I mean, look, that's probably a little bit above my pay grade. I really only book on my days. Maybe I'll have her on.
I don't really understand what Emma means by that. She says, well, that seems a little bit above my pay grade, but then goes on to admit that she does do the booking for the segments where it's just her, like this one. So if that's true, then what's your excuse for not having Marianne Williamson on? That seems kind of weird to me. But let's keep watching.
But I respect Marianne Williamson as a person. I like her. I think there are limits to her candidacy. It's not necessarily tethered to movements, labor in the way that I would like. And generally, I don't know. I think that her value is being overstated in the primary.
I mean, I just want to say quickly, like, I view our role in this as more defensive than offensive. I don't think independent media is a vanguard propelling somebody to the president's office. And I think it's a problem that people look at it that way. Like, if Bernie Sanders would have won the primaries, it would have been because of the coalition building among like progressive movements and unions. And to me, it's like, I'm kind of interested in Marianne, but it's also like there's things that I'm less intrigued.
And I do really like Matt Leck. We've had him on the show. I think he's a great guy, really smart guy. But I totally disagree with what he said there. Completely undermining the role that progressive media and left-wing media played in Bernie Sanders' movement, saying that even if Bernie had won, it wouldn't be thanks to left-wing media, it wouldn't be thanks to independent media, it'd all be thanks to the organizing and the unions and stuff, which obviously is just as, if not more important. No one's denying that. But progressive media played a huge role in educating the youth, especially to the candidacy of Bernie Sanders, and explaining to people why he was such a preferable option by basically every single metric over Hillary Clinton, for example. That's how I found out about Bernie Sanders. You know, the TYTs and the Secular Talks, the Majority Reports, all of these shows, the Humanist Report, the Rational National, all these shows that popped up and got really popular around the Bernie Sanders 2016 campaign. I think they did massive work as far as, like I said, helping to educate and raise awareness about Bernie's campaign and explaining to people why it was so necessary to have a progressive challenge from the left, and for, why all these policies such as Medicare for All were so necessary in the first place. So in the same way, I wish progressive media was playing that role for Marianne Williamson. I understand that there are reservations to be had, some of which were just raised by Emma Vigeland and Matt Leck. But honestly, I don't think those reservations are big enough for progressive media not to step in and help to boost Marianne Williamson. Obviously, it's not our job to put her in the White House, like Matt Leck said. Like, it's not literally our job to propel her to the White House. But do we have some responsibility as progressive commentators to cover and boost progressive candidates? Of course we do. And I think they understand that on other levels of government. I mean, they've had on Justice Democrats, they've had on tons of progressive candidates to help boost them. That no one would say it's their job to, elect these candidates, but is it part of progressive media's role to raise awareness about and educate the people about progressive options in electoral politics? Of course it is. I think that's obvious.
Yeah, I think both things can be true, that it's incumbent on progressive media to boost and uplift these candidates, while also recognizing that I don't know if we can empirically say for sure how much of an impact progressive media did have on the Bernie Sanders campaign. And the only reason I would raise that flag is because other candidates that have tried to run specifically from progressive media have always ended in a tremendous failure, right? So, for example, the leverage that the progressive media has been able to put when it's divorced from the machine of the union activists, etc., of the Bernie Sanders media cycle, it's been much harder for progressive media to get those people across the finish line. I think that might have been more of what Matt was illustrating. Look, we've had a chat with Matt about his feelings about Marianne Williamson. I know that he's, kind of in the same boat as Emma Vigeland articulated. Like, he really wants to see unions get behind her. And until then, he's not interested. I just disagree with the conclusion there, right? Like, for sure, it might be not enough to just have progressive media get behind a candidate. I think that's relatively obvious, right? Like, unfortunately, we talk about this all the time. We are very, very limited in our power, particularly a show like The Vanguard, less limited, but still limited in a show with 1 million subscribers or more, like a Secular Talk or a Breaking Points or a Majority Report. And Breaking Points doesn't technically have 1 million subs, but they get engagement with the same or higher level than a lot of million sub channels. So I think it's fair to loop them in and say that even though it might be true that there are things that are missing from this puzzle piece, right? We can still play a role in facilitating moving the ball forward in this capacity. And look, I get it. It's every commentator's, right to decide what beats they cover and what beats they don't. Over here at the Vanguard, we've made a calculation that to us seems like common sense, where if you find a candidate that is dramatically to the left of the incumbent, that aligns with your viewpoints 9 out of 10 times, then yeah, you should dedicate a good amount of airtime to exposing your audience to that person's belief system and trying to drum up support for them. But I just think that it's coming at it from the fact that, like, I think they're both like, hey man, like, we saw what machine was behind Bernie Sanders and that still came up short. If there's not an even bigger machine behind Marianne Williamson, like, we're just not interested. And I do think that that's a slightly defeatist attitude, but all I'm trying to say is I think that's where they're coming from.
Oh, I get where they're coming from, but it's kind of like the chicken and the egg thing. It's like, yeah, it's true. Marianne Williamson doesn't have that machine behind her yet, but Bernie Sanders didn't start off that way either. He had to build that too. And I do think that progressive media, independent media, was a huge part of the reason why he was able to build that machine behind him, why he was able to attract the support and the broad coalition that he was able to attract. Obviously, it's not 100% thanks to independent media, but they did a huge role. And not just media shows on YouTube. I'm talking about online in general, online leftists raising awareness, talking about Bernie Sanders, hyping people up about his agenda and his message and what he was really bringing to the table. And the same thing could be said for Donald Trump, by the way, just on the right wing. Donald Trump was in many ways hugely a creation of online, independent, right-wing media, conservative media. You guys might remember the people at Fox News and the Republican establishment basically pulled out all the stops in order to try to defeat Donald Trump and in order to try to make people not take him seriously. But thanks to the fact that the online conservatives were pretty united behind Trump, and they were like, this is our guy. He speaks our language. He's dog whistling to all of the issues that we want him to. He's speaking to us. They got him across the finish line, and Fox News ultimately wasn't able to have it their way. In the same way, that happened with Bernie Sanders, and in the same way, it can happen with Marianne Williamson if we all get on the same page and advocate for her. At least that's my opinion. Obviously, it's these guys' decision to cover whatever they want. It's their show. I'm not going to tell them what to cover. Obviously, we can cover what we want. They can cover what they want. But I'm just saying, it does bum me out that progressive media isn't more united behind Marianne Williamson, given the fact that her platform is so similar to Bernie Sanders. It's so substantive. She's so serious, and is being completely ignored by the media for the most part. It seems like this is a logical place for us to step in and play our role as progressive media. But with all that said, let's keep watching.
By Marianne, as far as like a challenge candidacy, it's a downgrade from Bernie Sanders, just subjectively speaking. That doesn't mean I think you should attack it. That doesn't mean I think you should support it. But as far as like trying to like force it, like she's got to get buy-in with, she's got to create a movement. I don't think that starts primarily with YouTube. I think it starts with actual like organizers, and then I think I think we take it a little bit more seriously. That doesn't mean I think we haven't even talked about whether we're going to have her on, frankly, to my knowledge.
I mean, we've been trying to have other politicians on that we just like literally dropped the ball on because we are kind of we run a, like, it's not that
but
many
we don't
people
do that much.
This. I know we don't. I know, but we'd had like
we
two
don't.
people.
Sam doesn't like talking to politicians.
Yeah, right. He doesn't.
He's too
I like it
cynical.
more. Yeah, actually.
He's like honestly, Bernie's one of the only ones that he's not like reserved about. So
and Ilhan.
Okay, and that's where I want to jump back in because look, Bernie Sanders was a unicorn, guys. This guy had spent his whole life, man, his whole life being basically on the right side of history. Okay, he was like a mythological creature. There's a photograph of him in Jim Crow era protests, getting hauled off by the police, protesting segregation. He's being hauled, fucking never resisting, bro. A super powerful image, right? All the way up to him not voting for the Iraq war, all the way up to him, all kinds of stuff. Recently, he didn't vote on the rail strike. He was like, absolutely not. A bunch of other fucking phony progressives did, but not Bernie Sanders. All right, just a fucking few off the top of my head from throughout his life. Tirelessly advocating for democratic socialism, for healthcare for all, leading people across to Canada to get, this guy was a unicorn. Man, I get it. You want to compare anybody on fucking God's green earth as far as progressive candidates go to Bernie Sanders? It's like comparing a basketball. Oh, that dude can't be MVP. Have you seen Michael Jordan play basketball? You know what I mean? It's like, oh man, how'd you give it to Embiid this year? He's no Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. It's like, okay, there are some dudes that were just way fucking better than like anybody that's playing ball right now, right? Like, and not better in the sense that like, oh, like Marianne is a worse person than Bernie Sanders. Obviously not. But I'm just talking about political pedigree, right? Bernie Sanders had gone through it, and he had demonstrated himself time and time again, right? But I want to throw this one thing up here, right? Because this was a moment that a lot of people point to when they say that this was the turning point for Bernie Sanders. This was when he started to really get his feet underneath him. This is a Politico article from August 10th, 2015. And I think, Gavin, you probably remember this. This was right when we were starting senior year of high school. We had just gone. This would have been like the first day back. I remember I had AP government in Stu Stern's AP government class, and we talked about this on the first fucking day of school because Mr. Stern was based. He was a fucking comrade, and this dude was stoked as fuck. And I remember it was crazy because where Gavin and I grew up, you were not going to find a lot of teachers that were at all sympathetic to Bernie Sanders. And he wasn't even like, my teacher wasn't a fucking socialist or anything. He was just a hippie. And he was like, I love seeing a good curveball, like kind of come in, So anyway, this is the moment when it really felt like it was going to start to happen for Bernie. This is a 185,000 member national union, okay, of all the nurses. They all endorse Bernie Sanders, okay? This is the nurses union coming out and saying, we want to give everybody Medicare for all. Very powerful because nurses typically, it's not like, it can be a high-paying job depending on the kind of work that you're doing. But a lot of times people get into that because they're caretakers by nature. They want to take care of people. They want to help people and heal them, right? This makes a perfect bedrock for you to run your campaign on, and that didn't happen until August. We're in May, so while you and I are we're both going to bat for Marianne as far as the fact that the media should cover her. I also think that if this is going to be a successful campaign, Marianne needs something like that to happen by the end of summer, by approaching September. She's going to need to kick it into this. Like, we're in gear 1 right now. That's how you pull it back into gear 2. Okay. And the engine starts to rev and you can take off. I'm not disagreeing with, Matt, that is something that needs to happen. I'm just saying, look at the timeline. Don't put the cart before the horse, and don't say, I don't want to get behind this person because she's not Bernie Sanders. It's like, yeah, dude, Bernie Sanders won't fucking run. And that's a problem. So, yeah, I have a little bit of a different analysis, but I want to be fair and measured because I do think that there are good points being raised here, and I want to categorically refute them.
Oh, 100%, 100%. And I totally agree with what you're saying about Bernie Sanders being a unicorn. Obviously, we're not going to get another candidate that reaches that level, as far as having such a perfect track record, as far as political experience and all that stuff. So I get that, but I'm annoyed by this continual comparison between Marianne Williamson and Bernie Sanders, as if Bernie Sanders is also in this race, and as if people like Zach and I are supporting Marianne Williamson over Bernie Sanders. No, Bernie Sanders ain't running for fucking president this time. He is not the alternative to Marianne Williamson, so there's no reason to put the bar that high. We got to remember, the bar is not at Bernie Sanders right now. It's at Joe Biden, and Marianne Williamson more than clears that bar. So that's the comparison and the contrast that needs to be made. Again, not between Bernie and Marianne, but between Marianne and Joe Biden, because that's who she's running against. Bernie isn't in this race. I wish he was.
And then, yeah, right. I mean,
Right. But even then, it's like, it's not as, we're not as enthusiastic. We're not having Ilhan on every week. And like Sam wouldn't want to do that.
yes.
No, I understand. I do think that Sam, last time I called, I don't want to be annoying, but I will be if I have to. I think he kind of mischaracterized what I said once. He kind of, I didn't take it personally, but he kind of made it sound like I was expecting the majority report to like move the masses, That's not what I was asking.
Okay.
I know that to a certain extent, Marianne Williamson is not being given the acknowledgement that I think as a candidate she should, not just from the mainstream, but I worry through this channel as well. So the Majority Report, let me just say, has more segments and video on Nikki Haley than the only progressive candidate that is echoing absolutely everything that you stand for.
Boom. Such a great point. 10 times more segments from the Majority Report on Nikki Haley than Marianne Williamson. Woo, that's pretty damning in my opinion. And here's why. As progressives, we cannot fall into this trap of only talking about what we are against. We also have to talk about what we are for. That's the Hillary Clinton strategy. That's the Joe Biden strategy, to just talk about the opposition, to just talk about the enemies and the Republicans. Oh, let's do segment after segment after segment talking about Nikki Haley. As if that's relevant, as if she has any chance of winning whatsoever. And again, I'm not trying to throw shade at the Majority Report. If they want to do a bunch of segments mocking Nikki Haley, then that's their right, and they can have a field day with that. But still, I think the point stands. As a progressive movement, we cannot just spend all of our time calling out the right wing, attacking the right wing, mocking people like Nikki Haley, or doing 500,000 segments about every stupid thing that Candace Owens has ever said, without talking about what we are actually for. Because if you're a normie American, if you're just a normie, politically interested American who's tuning into this, and you're like, oh, well, this show's from a progressive perspective, right? They sure do spend a lot of time talking about what they're against. They sure do spend a lot of time talking about how bad Republicans are. But who do we actually have to root for as a progressive, as a, citizen of this country that has a progressive ideology? Who do we actually have to root for? Who do we have to get invested in? What candidacies or campaigns or movements do we have to get invested in? And if they're not going to cover the one that does exist, then yeah, they basically are just doing the Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden strategy of talk about them and talk about what's bad about the Republicans without ever talking about what we're actually in favor for and who can actually deliver those sorts of results.
Yeah, and to the Majority Report's credit, I think they would probably push back and talk about some of the strides that they like to cover when they cover, union strikes, when they, talk about WGA, talk about, how they covered the John Deere strikes, and I've heard that pushback from people as well. Just this morning, I think Ben Burgess tweeted about how the left needs to adjust its, vision of success from an electoral one and towards like the strides that we're actually making on the ground. And and to that, I always just say, porque no los dos, right? Like, we cover Marianne Williamson a lot, but we've also covered the WGA strike like 3 different days. I feel like about equitably with how we cover the primary. And I think that, you made the point wonderfully. Like, look, regardless of whether or not we like it, the left needs a mascot. They need a mascot. They need somebody that's like, okay, yeah, who do we get behind though? Because we're all busy as fuck and this, then that, and I volunteer one day a week, but this is, how do I do more than that? And okay, there's nobody around. The left needs somebody that's an anchor, right? That's like, here is how you do this. While Bernie Sanders is running, I know I can speak specifically for Kansas City. There was a lot of stuff that you could do to, support him. You could knock doors. You could go to an XY event. You could, talk to people about this. And by doing that, you were also spreading your message about Medicare for all, about democratic socialism, about climate change. You were both a climate activist, a fucking healthcare activist, an activist to end U.S. imperialism abroad, reinvest domestically. Like you were part of all of those things through the candidate. And I think that American people, whether we like it or not, that's how they understand politics, is elections, because that's how it's beat into your fucking head. So we can talk about how we need to expand people's understanding of politics to be more praxis-based, or organizing. But guys, I got to tell you, all right, and this is no shade, I have gone to our local DSA meetings, and I did not feel like I was making meaningful strides in our community doing that, right? There are great organizations that you can get involved with in Kansas City. Don't get me wrong. We shout out Casey Tenants all the time. Those guys are G's. Perhaps the model for any tenant union, the single greatest model for any tenant union across the country. I mean, the activism that those people do is unreal, the gains that they've made. And you can check out my girlfriend Elisa's reporting on that. She does great work. But when it comes to having people that you can get behind, that you can understand at a national level, we always bring up the example of how far we were able to drag leftist politics into the political mainstream. We're not having any of these conversations without the 2016 run. And once you've shown people how much you can shift the conversation with one election cycle, stuff that decades and decades of on the ground work from the Green Party wasn't able to accomplish happened seemingly overnight. It wasn't overnight, but it was a large groundswell. And I get it. Nothing is overnight, right? Like, filmmakers would talk about that all the time. It's 15 years of watching 3 films every day just so you can have your like overnight success. And I think that's exactly what happened with Bernie Sanders. Is, of course, all that activism that those people were doing for decades finally erupted over the top. But I just think that there's this, people have seen that. They've seen it. They've gotten a taste for it. And doing something that's, such a slow moving process after that, big event. It's like, it doesn't feel like the same thing, which is going to be tough for the left, and something that we should grapple with. And one of the other reasons why I, support Marianne Williamson, because I think it's a good way of wrangling a bunch of people who have common goals, and you can, put them to an actual purpose. You know what I mean? If we can find, 800, 900 other people in Kansas City that are all going to vote for Marianne Williamson, or have been, collectively like enjoyed her political vision. Now we've been connected. Like, now what can we go out and do? How can we use that leverage at a local level, at the political council level, where 900 people is a fucking lot of people, right? Anyway.
100% correct. And it's really true that the rising tide lifts all the boats. And that's really how it works with progressive activism. So many people got involved in progressive activism thanks to the Bernie Sanders campaign, because after the Bernie campaign was over, it's not like they just stopped caring about politics. No, they entered other arenas of activism and kept the ball rolling, just at a different level, right? Not working on a presidential campaign anymore, but working on, say, state ballot initiatives to try to get Medicare for all within their state borders, stuff like that. So yeah, the rising tide lifts all the boats. That's how I look at a progressive candidate running for president. And while I agree, Zach, that obviously, yes, the Majority Report does great work covering unions, covering strikes. Of course, we give them credit for that, and they do really wonderful analysis there. But it's not like they don't talk about electoralism. They do talk about electoralism quite a lot. They've made 20 segments about Nikki Haley, as the caller said. They talk about progressives in Congress and the Justice Democrats, and they will have on, by their own admission, people like Ilhan Omar and Bernie Sanders. So it's not like they don't talk about electoralism. It's not like it's not something they believe in. They clearly do, which is why I don't think they have as much of an excuse to not cover Marianne Williamson or not have her on to, talk about some of these criticisms directly to her. But there is still 4 or 5 minutes left in this, so let's take a listen. Shout out to this caller, by the way. Hopefully this caller listens to the Vanguard, because we've devoted quite a bit of coverage to Marianne's campaign, obviously. So shout out to the caller. I think they make some really good points here. Super articulate, respectful. In fact, I'd like to have them on the Vanguard if they ever want to. But yeah, let's take a listen to the rest of this.
That's
not absolutely everything that I stand for. Like, I don't like, again, like the thing she speaks on certain things, and like, I mean, to be honest, even Bernie on certain Israel-Palestine things, I'm not entirely in agreement with. But like, there's certain
the issue. I'm sorry. Again, I love Matt, but like, what's the issue? If you're admitting that, yeah, I have some disagreements with Marianne, but no more than I did with Bernie. Okay, well, it seems like we all pretty solidly got on Team Bernie despite our disagreements. We were able to put those aside and recognize that obviously he was the best candidate by every single conceivable metric. Seems like a similar situation with Marianne, in my opinion.
certain like questions like that where she's talking about Avatar, and like I know like it's unfair to people talk about the crystals and stuff, but it's also not grounded in like my politics. No. So like, and Nikki Haley is like there's actually like
a threat that she could actually be the vice president, and Marianne Williamson will not be the president. So the point is just that
not with this attitude, she won't. I'm just kidding.
Like, we have a finite amount of time, a finite amount of things that we can emphasize. I don't think that it's a correct characterization that she represents my politics, because my politics are not just about ideas and what she says, which I love that she says good things and has a good heart. I believe that about her. I care way more about the power coalitions behind that politician, and she has none of that. She's really has no unions behind her, no organizations that I really follow. And so for me, it doesn't matter that much to me, if I'm being fully honest.
Oh, it's so frustrating. Again, at this point in Bernie's campaign, he didn't either. In 2016, no one was taking him seriously, including the unions, including organized labor, all that stuff. No one was on his side at this point in Bernie's campaign. It takes a few months. And it just really does frustrate me the way the progressive media isn't understanding that and isn't understanding the role that we play in that movement happening, in that, machine getting started. It just, I don't know. It bothers me.
I think that the point that they are articulating that I can see other individuals having concerns about coming from the left is that they look at Marianne Williamson history and they don't see it rooted in organized labor in the same way that they feel like they saw Bernie Sanders' history rooted in organized labor. Now, I know Marianne Williamson would articulate that, her whole family is rooted in organized labor. And so from a different perspective, as an American, she understands the power and the importance of being union. She on her fucking campaign website, she, talks about how when she was a little girl, they told her if she crossed a picket line, she better not come home. These kinds of things, I think, to me, speak to my sensibilities of, I am also a regular American. I also, see that, the best days of our country were when we had strong union working jobs, even though I never got to fucking live them, only read about them in textbooks, right? She can articulate how she's lived and she's watched this erode, right? And hopefully potentially win over these union members, because you're right, Gavin, it wasn't like day one Bernie Sanders announces and all of these fucking unions come out in support of him. No, as somebody pointed out in the super chats, Brian, I believe most union leaders in the US are co-opted by Democratic Party leadership. Taking your political cues from them is an embrace of the status quo. We saw what happened with the railroad strikers. Okay. So yes, 100%, Brian. So it was going to take a little bit of time, right? They were going to pitch, Hillary Clinton for sure in 2016 to their base and say hey, and that was not going to fly well, right? NAFTA, of course. But I think that was still the plan. I think it was still the plan to be like, well, what do you want? A Republican? Do you want Donald Trump? That's the same way that they go about everything. So look, I think that it is fair to say, I want to see more of an effort from Marianne Williamson to get involved with unions. I want to see her reaching out to union workers, members. I want to see her really court these endorsements. That is totally fair to say, for sure. And I also would like to see that. And I'll ask her. I think that's a great question to ask her about. How are you courting the, organized labor vote in this country? Are you working with any of these, institutions? Have you been in talks with them? To answer and assuage somebody who has the concerns that Emma does. We're fortunate enough to be able to interview Marianne Williamson. And so I think that's a great question to ask. What I think is it's just jumping the gun a little bit to be like, again, well, she didn't have all of the credentials that Bernie Sanders have. Why would we waste our time and not just, roll over and let Joe Biden have another 4 years, which is not going to happen. Most likely it'll be 4 more years of Trump, which is horrible to think about. So that's where my head's at. But shout out to you, Brian. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Zach, and I totally agree with you too, Brian. Also, it's worth noting that even if all the unions are currently behind Joe Biden instead of Marianne Williamson, it's not because all the rank and file union members decided that they personally feel more politically aligned with Joe Biden over Marianne Williamson. No, the reason why they're behind Biden right now and not Marianne is because right now they think that Biden's going to win and they don't want to lose their sway with his administration by getting on the or endorsing his competitor who they do view as a long shot campaign right now. Again, it's not because they agree with Biden more. It's not because they think he's a more pro-union president than Marianne would be, or that his politics are more pro-labor than Marianne's. No, it's just because they currently think that he's going to be president again, or at least the Democratic nominee, and they don't want to lose sway within his administration, despite the fact that, as Brian points out, the unionized workforce has actually declined under Biden. So obviously Biden is not a pro-labor president. He's not a union-friendly president, despite his posturing, and they know that. But again, they don't want to risk losing that sway. And for that reason, I do think it's a little bit silly. Again, understanding that calculation on their part, I still think it's a little bit silly to then be like, well, until they're all on board with Marianne, we're just gonna sit here and let Biden become the nominee again, I guess.
Especially because, to your point, Gavin, my homie Tristan, shout out to Tristan, he's the editor of the KC Labor Beacon, and him and I, we've had some good chats over a couple of Negronis where I'm like, because he calls our podcast the Left of Left podcast, which I think is really funny. Like, he's like a real, like, fucking working labor guy. He's like very rooted in the, like, what is tangible for Kansas City to accomplish this election cycle. He works in the weeds. He's a great guy though, fucking great dude. And so I'll always be talking to him, and he'll be like, bro, he'll be like, I talk to these union guys all day, every day, and bro, and they are into Biden right now. They're fucking into Biden. Why? Because they know they're fucked if Donald Trump gets elected, and exactly what you said, Gavin, where it's like they have sway with Joe Biden if they ride with him. Why would they gamble on somebody? And then what is Joe Biden going to doubly fuck them? Right? Because I was like, oh, are all the union guys really pissed about Joe Biden because of what happened with the rail road workers? And he was like, actually, Kansas City doesn't have that many rail workers. We're mostly like UAW and Teamsters, so it hasn't been that much of a hot button issue. And I'm like, damn, what the fuck? Like, so we all have to have like a little bit of like a wake up call to that and realize that, like, you actually have to go in there and work and make your sales pitch to those union guys who are fucking committed to Joe Biden right now, unfortunately. So I think it's fair pushback. And again, that's a question I'm excited to ask Marianne about, because I would love to know how she plans to deal with that, because it's going to be something that her campaign obviously has to do. Like, Gavin and I aren't fucking delusional. We are very aware that has to happen if this is going to be a viable campaign. I'm just not willing to write it off and say that it's impossible to do that, because I've seen it happen before in recent history.
Yep. And by the way, I guess that's a good time to announce the fact that Marianne Williamson will be returning to the Vanguard this Friday at 2 p.m. So make sure to mark your calendars and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our interview with Marianne Williamson. This will be our first interview with Marianne since she's actually declared her candidacy. So we're going to have some great questions for her, including that one about unions and how she plans on getting some of their support, because obviously it's a great question. It's a valid question.
Also, this conversation might be a little bit different if there wasn't an incumbent Democratic president. Like, no one's going to put a challenge up to Biden. I'm sorry, it's just not going to happen. Like, unless Biden himself, which it doesn't seem like it's going to happen, decides not to run for re-election, there is no real Democratic primary. Even if Bernie he said he's not going to if Biden chooses to run again. But even if Bernie ended up being the one to challenge a sitting Democratic president in Biden, it would just not get the same play as if this was some open Democratic primary where there was no incumbent. It's just,
I have to disagree with that too. I think that if Bernie jumped in this race and challenged Biden, that he absolutely would have a shot of taking the nomination. I really wish that Bernie had the balls to do that, because I really do think that he would have a serious shot at doing so. And I get it. There's not much historical precedent, if any, for what Marianne and RFK are trying to do. It is very hard to take down an incumbent president. But we can't exclude the fact that it's also unprecedented for a Democratic nominee to be as unpopular as Joe Biden is, specifically within his own base of
and
support.
oldest.
And as old as he is. Not only is it unprecedented how unpopular he is, he's the oldest person to ever hold the White House. And he'll be like in his mid 80s by the time he's his late 80s by the time he's done with his second term, if in fact he is elected again. So we're dealing with an unprecedented incumbent here who's uniquely vulnerable and who the majority of his own party doesn't want to be the nominee. This is the perfect election cycle for a progressive to challenge the status quo and to stand up to this bullshit. You can say that Marianne's has some issues or you disagree with her here and there. But to say that even Bernie wouldn't have a shot or wouldn't be taken seriously, I think that's ridiculous. I think that's buying into the DNC logic and the way they want you to be thinking about this primary.
It's tough because I know a lot of people are chiming in chat reminding us that Bernie's also old as fuck. That's true, but he is a lot more spry. He's a spring chicken compared to Joe Biden. It has nothing to do with the fact that I think Bernie's a little older than him. Isn't he a little like a year older? It doesn't matter to me, though. I mean, look, would it be easier for Bernie to win this primary if he were 68 years old and fucking coming at it and clobbering? Yeah, then I think that he would go in there and he would like make Joe Biden cluck like a chicken and, just fucking fumble his words around and look like an old man, of course. I think even still, as Bernie goes on there, the elder of the two, he still makes Joe Biden look like a fucking, like the marbles are gone, man. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, and corn pop. And then that's what we're going to do. You can't even fucking understand the guy half the time. It's embarrassing as fuck. Okay. It's embarrassing. This guy should be eating soup and going to bed at 4:30. Okay, he should not be president of the United States. This is the reality of the situation here. So again, I think a ham sandwich could put the fucking work on Joe Biden on a debate stage. I think that even RFKJ and all of my fucking vast criticisms of the guy would still probably he's not going to be good on the debate stage, guys. I'm sorry, but even he might edge it out. He's still at least cognitively all there, where Joe Biden's not. And then I just think that it's crazy to think that like Joe Biden's like the weakest candidate of all time. If it was ever going to happen for an incumbent, and fine, you don't think that it can happen. I still think you teach the Democrats some fucking lessons and you go out there and you run third party and you show them the haul that they missed out on because Joe Biden's not going to beat Trump anyway. He's not going to beat Donald Trump. So I don't want to hear any, well, that's just handing the election to Donald Trump. No, the DNC handed the election to Donald Trump the second they rigged it to give us Joe Biden. I don't want to fucking hear it.
Yep. And even if Marianne fails miserably, like I said, rising tide lifts all boats. It's going to be helpful to the progressive movement writ large if we have a national figurehead leading a progressive campaign, leading the crusade. It's going to rise. It's going to lift all the boats. It's going to get more people involved. It's going to educate more people as to why we need Medicare for all, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There is literally no downside, in my opinion.
It's just not the dynamics calling for this. There's just nothing's going to come out of this. And maybe there'd be a bigger conversation if Marianne had that movement behind her that would make it interesting that she could possibly push Biden on issues, but she doesn't even have that. Like, she's not going to push Biden on anything. Let's be honest.
And it's up to her to develop it if it's going to happen. And I don't think it's on like skeptical media or like sort of lukewarm media to make it happen.
But look, Elena, we got to jump in a sec. Just final thoughts from you. I think your heart's in the right place, as I think Marianne Williamson's is. I just don't think the circumstances really line up for the kind of coverage that you would like, to be honest, from us. I have to be honest with my perspective, I
think it's fair. I'm coming from a place of someone, last time she was running, that completely bought into the whole crystal guru spiritual,
kind of same
BS that was being sold. I didn't think of her once. I didn't consider her. I thought she was just a kook. I bought into it. And it wasn't until she started running today, forgive me, I don't remember exactly what it was that she said, but it was completely different. I genuinely felt cheated by an entire media machine, whether you feel like you belong to it or not. I respect your show. I respect your mission. But I saw something completely different, and I really felt betrayed by just the portrayals. I think everything you guys are saying is fair.
All right. Well, I appreciate it, Elena. Thank you for calling in. Got to jump. I apologize.
And I will
jump
say
in real quick.
Hackman is going too hard.
Yeah, and just to jump in right there, because look, man, I was it's always Gavin. We were the hardest of Bernie bros. We were like, fuck anybody but Bernie Sanders. Like, I don't want to hear from anybody but Bernie. And so I really had tunnel vision on that for a while, and I'll wear that on my chin. I didn't give Marianne like a full consideration, a fair consideration in the 2020 election cycle. My vote was already claimed by Bernie Sanders the second he announced his re-election bid. It was how I felt, and that was where I went. But it was after that election cycle when Marianne kept working, when she kept endorsing, down ballot candidates, when she kept, really utilizing any clout or name recognition that she'd garnered from her presidential race to do more of the things that Bernie Sanders wasn't doing, to stick her neck out for somebody like Eva Putsova in Arizona, right? Against a blue dog Democrat, right? Somebody that AOC had actually sent money in to help squash Eva Putsova, the insurgent candidate, right? These kinds of things really made her stand out to me. And I understand where the caller's coming from and feeling cheated, because it was like, oh, wow, you know what? Even in all of my, criticisms of her at the time, I think that she's demonstrated herself to be a really good faith actor. I think that she's demonstrated that her heart is really in the right place, consistently, so.
Like trying to cut it off at the knees, and I mean that's why when we talked about the first time, it was
Sorry, I want to go back just a second because he called out David Pakman,
and I really felt betrayed by just the portrayals. I think everything you guys are saying is fair.
All right. Well, I appreciate it, Elena. Thank you for calling in. Got to jump. I apologize.
Yeah, and I will say I think Pakman is going too hard, trying to cut it off at the knees. And I mean that's why when we talked about the first time, it was upset with Karine Jean-Pierre with her bullshit little joke about it.
Condescending.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's wrong, but it's also there's only so much time I can act enthusiastic about it without my actual reservations about it coming through.
Right. She should absolutely run if she wants to run. And anyone who's pointing out some doom or gloom scenario and having a Democratic primary is ridiculous, because it's just honestly not even going to be I mean, I wish it wasn't this way, but it is. It's not even going to be a blip on the radar when you have if you have a primary where in the party that has the incumbent in office. It's just not even, it doesn't matter, honestly. She should be able to run because it shows that she has the ability to do so, and anyone who wants to run should be able to run. But and I would love to talk with her too. I think it would be probably a great conversation, but it's just honestly, just the reality of the situation is it's just nothing's going to come out of it.
I would interview Marianne Williamson about the whole kit and caboodle, the run, the crystals, everything, because that's just my wheelhouse. But so if she wants to come on the discourse, I know my co-host would also love to. She can reach out and we will have her on. We'll make it work after I move. We'll make it happen.
Beautiful.
Shout out to Brandon. I like Brandon. He's like, I'll talk to her. I don't know what you guys are talking about, but I'll talk to Marianne. Anyway, I would like to see Marianne Williamson go on the Majority Report and respond to some of the criticisms that they have of her. I think that would be a good conversation. And shout out to them for calling out David Pakman too, and saying that it's ridiculous how a guy like David Pakman is out here acting like Marianne Williamson is some sort of insidious candidate who's worthy of mockery and it should not be taken seriously at all. That's stupid. So I'm glad they're not on that page, but I still think I still wish, rather, they can do whatever they want, but I wish that progressive media, Majority Report included, would just get more on team Marianne, because again, the alternative is not Bernie Sanders. The alternative is Joe Biden. And at this point in Bernie Sanders' campaign, he did not have a movement behind him. He did not have any unions support. And for the ball to get rolling, for the snowball to get rolling, I think progressive media can play a very important role that shouldn't be undermined or underplayed. Last thing I wanted to look at as it relates to this clip is the comment section. In case you're wondering what the Majority Report's audience thought about this conversation and Marianne Williamson herself, let's take a look. Top comment: I believe Marianne should be on the show. So it seems like people want them to interview Marianne Williamson. This person says, I'm not even on TikTok, but I know how popular she is on there with young voters. I think you're underestimating her ability to break through the noise. She had Hannity's audience turning on him in his comments during her interview on Fox. might have watched our clip about that. If more independent media sources get her face, her voice, and her message out there, she could actually stand a chance. At the end of the day, I think she believes in her message and will fight for progressive change. If you don't support the person who genuinely advocates for the policies we want, then we'll never get that change. This moment requires us to be brave, bold, and unrelenting. Changing the world isn't easy, but it's necessary. Woo! So well spoken. I totally agree with that. And I think it's correct to say that if you don't support the person who genuinely advocates for the policies we want, then we'll never get that change. And I'm sick of hearing, well, yeah, I agree with her and I like some of the things she say, but it's not really my brand of politics. I guess because of her spirituality. It's like, I'm not a Jew. I still supported Bernie Sanders. I'm not a Christian, but someone being Christian wouldn't stop me from supporting them if they were progressive. In the same way, just because I'm not exactly on the same page with Marianne's brand of New Age spirituality, in no way does that stop me from wanting to support her. In no way do I care about the fact that her politics aren't the exact same quote unquote brand that mine are. I care about the actual policy positions. And if we just endlessly nitpick people based on the fact that we don't love their vibes, I just think that's ridiculous and unproductive as a movement.
The people want something besides Joe Biden, and I think we should offer it to them. And I think Marianne's trying to offer it to them. And I don't see why, her New Age spirituality, which we should also add, like 70% of Americans believe in an afterlife. They believe in heaven and hell. They believe in a God and shit. Okay. Even though I'm in that 30%, that's like, no, dude, you're never going to fucking convince me for you know what I mean? I'm a pretty ardent atheist, right? I think we've even grown into, I never thought I would see the day. I think I'm even a more ardent atheist than Gavin. Gavin has pivoted to more agnosticism. That's fine. I've only gotten more entrenched in my fucking, concrete views, right? That's fine. It's completely irrelevant to me in how I analyze the situation with Marianne Williamson. And again, call me a mark. I don't give a fuck. I can only offer my own analysis. I think that she has illustrated that her heart is in the right place, and compared to any other options that we have, on top of the fact that we agree on Medicare for all, that we agree that we want to have a fucking planet to live on and have our fucking grandchildren live on. Not my grandchildren, but I think Marianne might have grandchildren. So anyway, that we want to fix the economy and that it's deeply rigged, and that we need to do more for the American working class and working poor, that we need to stabilize housing costs. Do you see the litany of things that we fucking agree on? I'm sorry that we don't agree on what happens to us when we die. All right, I'm in the minority of that basically with everybody. I've learned to live with it.
100%. But yeah, I was actually shocked by how pro Marianne this comment section is. Here's another one saying, as someone who is not currently supporting Marianne, I'd like to see the majority report hear her out. It doesn't mean they need to endorse her candidacy, but I think it is worth having her on, even if she has almost no shot at winning. I believe in primaries, and I don't think incumbents should just be handed the nomination, I'm going to guess is what that says. Like, it's cut off for some reason, but still, yeah, again, this person's like, I'm not even necessarily supporting her, but I still think it's part of the majority report and progressive media's role in general to hear her out. I think that's fair to say. Again, the corporate media constantly boosts corporate candidates. Isn't it kind of part of our responsibility as progressive media to boost progressive candidates? I think it is. You don't have to agree with me there, but I think it is. Here's Noah saying, if CNN is going to give Trump an entire town hall for him to spew his garbage, the least majority report can do is give Marianne Williamson one interview. That's on point as well. This person says, I 100% agree with the caller. You need to bring her on the show. This is upsetting that they haven't even properly researched her. It is embarrassing to see people speak so confidently in ignorance. Damn, like I said, I was not expecting the majority report comment section to be this pro Marianne. What do you make of that, Zach?
It's tough because sometimes our comment section has gone off the rails, and I would hate for somebody to judge us based off of the wild shit y'all say in our comment section. But I do understand that it is important to glean feedback on how people are feeling about a certain segment. So I think that in the instance of something like this, obviously it's a YouTube comment section. You got to take it with a grain of salt. But at the very least, this demonstrates a desire from individuals to hear Marianne out and to boost her and give people a chance. And now you could, be a doomer and come over the top and say, well, these people just need to learn to stop prioritizing presidential electoral politics. Yeah, but the entire country already does that. So let's not just 86 our one chance to reach them while they're all looking at politics for the one time every 4 years everybody does. It's, you know, and it's like politics shouldn't be like the Olympics, but in this country it is. So we got to try and reach people and tell them, hey, let's stick around after the election cycle's over and actually do something this time, but let's not turn away the bounty of eyes and ears that are going to be turning towards independent media and, you know, legacy media alike at this very crucial and critical part of the, you know, process of politics in this country.